everybody. Welcome to the 20th Annual Green Tour. My name is Neil Bonsgard and my pronouns are he, him. And I am the program manager here at the Energy Challenge, which is a part of the Environmental Center. I'm joined by my colleague, Lindsay Hardy, who you'll be meeting during the Q&A. She'll be moderating the conversation with our experts today. And I just wanted to welcome you all to the panel, Backyard Uprising, which is all about ADUs and urban infill development, which is a very, very exciting topic. So,
thanks, Neil. Hi, everybody. I am Lindsay Hardy. My pronouns are she and her, and I work on the Energy Challenge with Neil. This has been a really fun and exciting week for us. We get to do the stuff that, talk about the stuff that we are so excited about and work on all year long. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We're going to dive in and meet them all and hear some of their stories, the ups, the downs, the challenges, the really cool parts. We'll get into a little bit of everything. All right, so I'd like to kick this off with Mary. Mary, could you give us a little bit of your background and introduce yourself? And maybe set the stage as to why ADUs and infills are so important.
Yes, thank you. Welcome to everybody, and thanks to Lindsay and Environmental Center staff for putting this all together, and everybody on the panel taking the time. So I, about 15 years ago, got involved in land development, and I was actually one of those developers that was building big 50-lot single-family subdivisions on the very outskirts of a town and bulldozing beautiful trees and natural areas, hooking up to very expensive utilities and roads, and the type of subdivision that is not close to any amenities. And so I had to kind of get that out there, but I've come full circle, and in the last few years have recently gotten more interested in infill development and housing policy. And for anybody that doesn't know, infill is kind of a wonky term, but it basically means there's underutilized lots that get developed in areas that are already developed. And generally they already have infrastructure, roads, sewer, water, utility connections, etc. And so ADUs are one type of infill development. There are many, but I'm particularly interested in ADUs. And if there's folks that are new to ADUs, the simplest definition is that it's an additional small dwelling unit that is built on a lot with an existing single-family home. And you see them, they could be in a backyard, over a garage. They could be built into the existing fabric of a house. And there's other terms that you often hear, but we use accessory dwelling unit here in Bend. And I became really passionate about ADUs as I got more involved in housing policy and sustainability. And I feel like there's a huge untapped potential for ADUs, and I get really excited about it because I know that we have a large amount of single family zoning, and this is primarily where you see these built. And Bend is no exception. We also have a lot of single family zoning here in our city as well. And so I feel like it's just a great way to add density, housing options, and affordability into the existing fabric of our neighborhoods.
Thanks, Mary. All right, Jesse, I want to move along to you and have you introduce yourself. I'm hoping you can share what your company's mission is. And I know you didn't necessarily get started with ADUs, but now you're building some and you've been involved in other infill opportunities. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my name's Jesse Russell. I own Hiatus homes in Bend. And I think I really started with the tiny house movement. That was where I grew up in Bend, and then was trying to get back to Bend and figure out how to get, have a job here. And I saw the tiny house stuff and just really fell in love with it and thought that would be something that would be embraced by our community. And when I returned and built our first tiny house on wheels, I found out really quickly that the code and the city code and land planning doesn't really support that type of structure. But within that, the cottage code came out and I was able to do this development called the Hiatus. It's in Southeast Bend. And those are 600 square foot homes that are, really by city standards are cottages, but we're inspired by the tiny house movement. And I think that movement also, has done wonders for the ADU movement as well, just because of the ingenuity that comes from building in a small space. And so from there, Mary and I have teamed up, and we're doing another piece. We have another development that we're doing that will have 2-bedroom, 2-bath houses that are smaller. They're only 900 square feet, and then it'll have our studio version, which is really the ADU. And I think I just really believe in the ADU movement. One of our primary goals, or my primary goals, in coming back and trying to densify the city that I grew up in, is so that the people. My mom was a single bartender that worked up at Mount Bachelor, and we didn't have a lot of money, but we could be in Bend. And I think that there's a lot of why Bend is Bend and has been such a great community is because of the people that live there. And if they get drawn, they get sent out because the land price is going up and there's nowhere for them to live, I think it'll significantly change what I love about Bend. So that's been a huge priority, and it was just kind of a black hole that led me down into this path of doing developments. And I'm really, really excited about what Mary and I are doing on this new infill lot that we have. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what our motivation is or has been.
Great, thanks, Jesse. Sorry, my internet started to freeze there.
No problem.
All right. Okay, and Rob, I would love to hear from you too. So Rob's actually designed 2 ADUs for folks on this panel. How did you get started with this design work with ADUs? And do you have a biggest lesson learned that you'd like to share with the design of these small spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been designing in Bend for quite a while, but ADUs became a part of my design portfolio about 5 years ago. Previously, until some code changes allowed them, they were very difficult to do. They required sign-offs from neighbors. There were huge restrictions. So they just weren't really prevalent at any point before. And then about 5 years ago or so, people started doing them. And it seems like every year, if not every 6 months even, the city has continually made the code easier and more able to approach and to be able to do them. So more and more they've grown to where I'd say right now they're about 1/3 of all the designs I do. So it's a lot. And as far as the biggest challenge goes, I'd have to say that's probably the fact that every ADU, in a sense, for every customer, is a custom plan. In my experience, depending on the person's intention of doing so, it's not like you're going to do an ADU over a garage if your plan is to move your elderly mother into it. And if you want to create an ADU for rental income, you're not very easily going to want to wall off part of your house, create a wall, and then allow people to access it, not comfortably at least. And then everybody has however much room they have on their property, solar setback requirements, other code requirements. It's surprising how little I've been able to reduplicate, say, what we would call a stock plan versus almost everything is a custom situation. So that's been really interesting as well.
Cool, thanks, Rob. All right, let's jump over to Ryan then. Ryan, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what motivated you to build your project, and then from there, what your timeline looked like?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Ryan. And actually, Rob, what you just said really, I was resonating with me going, every job is custom. I can only imagine that must be frustrating from a design perspective, because there is no repeatability, it seems. Rob knows the code though, like the back of his hand, even though it changes every day almost, it seemed, during our process. Let's see here. We had, and then Mary, you said an unused lot or underutilized lots. We had a classic underutilized lot. It's a big 70s plot of land. The main house was, smack dab in the middle. Well, not quite in the middle, fortunately, but had this giant side yard that was really just soaking up water, and it was this sad, unused lawn. And it had a ton of potential because it, if we went tall, which we did, there'd be a river view and obviously some, just a better use of the land instead of just taking a bunch of time to mow and water and all that. So, from the idea phase to move in was probably about a year. But there was a lot of sort of just hemming and hawing in there. From when we actually broke ground, it was around 6 months. It could have been a lot faster, but I chose to be the general contractor. Not only just the general contractor, but I did a fair bit of the work. So anytime I stepped in, it just ground to a halt essentially. And but I'm really glad I did it. I learned a lot. I enjoyed doing it. But I've seen these things going up around, and 2 or 3 months they can be done. So I definitely slowed it down, but I'm glad I did.
Great, thanks, Ryan. All right, and then Jamie and Josh, you all undertook a very comprehensive project. So can you tell us a little bit about your site that you lovingly call the Rec Center? Maybe start with why you call it that, and then what your journey has looked like.
It's not recreation rec, but rec with a W. And that stems from when we first bought the property 5 years ago. The house was in pretty bad state of disrepair. It had been neglected for probably about 20 years. It's a 100-year-old house this year. And before we had even moved in, our insurance policy had been canceled because it was basically uninhabitable. And so at some point we were talking about this rec and becoming the center, and that's where the Rec Center was born, and its legacy continues. It's kind of a work in progress, but we've got the 1920s house buttoned up and is pretty efficient. And now we have an attached ADU at 600 square feet with a garage below it.
Great, and then you also built your own ADU, correct? Josh, you took the lead on that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about how the project got started?
Well,
How you kicked things off in the snowstorm?
It took 3 or 6 months.
no, I don't know how
No.
long it took us, but it was a lot. And it definitely started out with some challenges when we first broke ground. It was just a few days later that we got hit with the brunt of a pretty heavy winter that definitely made it off to a slow start, to say.
It was the 2016-2017 winter.
But overall, it was a great experience. Even there in the beginning, I was lucky enough to have a good friend who's a builder here in town who kind of held our hand in the design and planning phase, and also in that excavation and the beginning phase and throughout framing. So.
Great. All right, and Mary, you have an experience building an ADU on your property. I wanted to hear a little bit, I know this is a really big question for folks and it varies a lot project to project, but can you talk a little bit about the cost for building an ADU and how you went about financing it?
Yeah, so I did. I worked with Rob and I had purchased a property as an investment and did a remodel. It was one of those old 100-year-old mill houses, and did a remodel on that, and then created some space in the back. And I actually wasn't originally going to build an ADU, and Rob will remember this. But I wanted to build as much as I could, and that lot allowed for 4 units total, and I only had 1. And so Rob and I got together, and he first designed a duplex. And I was going to build this duplex in the back, and it was on an alley. And then once I had that plan and started looking at the cost, it was going to be so expensive, the construction and the impact fees with the city and everything. And so we kind of canned that and then went back to the ADU plan. And I'm so glad that I did, because I always wanted to build an ADU. I just felt like that property could allow for so much more density. So it was kind of a tough decision, but in the end, I was really happy because the ADU probably cost about maybe a third of what the duplex was going to cost. And so all in, I think I built that about 2 years ago, and all in it was about 160,000, and it's 800 square feet, just under 800 square feet, 2-bedroom, 1 bath. So the construction portion was the most, obviously that was about 130,000 for the construction piece. And I think the next biggest was design and permitting, which was about 12,000. So I actually didn't finance it. I was very fortunate that I had some money from another project that I had sold. So I was kind of keeping that cash available to pay for the ADU. And so I was able to do that. But, you know, financing an ADU, that's probably one of the biggest barriers. And I think anyone that's looked into this, if you're not paying cash, it's not that easy to do. And you can use some equity, maybe do a home equity HELOC type of loan. But what's interesting is have been seeing more product now coming out, particularly for ADUs, and there's construction loans now for ADUs if people are looking into that. And in particular, Umpqua Bank has a really good product right now. And then there's another company called Craft 3 that's a nonprofit, and they have an ADU product as well. So yeah, so for me, like I said, I was very fortunate that I had the cash available for that project, but financing still remains one of the biggest barriers.
All right, thank you for sharing that, Mary. I was thinking we might dive into a little bit more around what is and why infill is really important here. So I'm going to kick this back over to Jesse. Can you tell us a little bit about your small home communities and what inspired you to start this multi-year project? I know it took you a while to go through the process of approaching the city to even allow this to happen. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So we built the first tiny house on wheels, and then it was in the Bend Design Conference, and I had a lot behind the library where I could park it. So I wanted to live in the house before the conference, so when people came to see the house, I could speak to what it was like to live in there. And I went to John Skidmore as an assistant city manager, and Russ Grayson, and told him what I was doing. I'm like, yeah, this is great. We've got these tiny houses on wheels, and we had a drawing on that particular lot that showed 4 or 5 of them with a little community garden, and I just kind of thought, of course, this would be the easiest thing to do ever because it was so cool and everyone seemed to think it was a great thing for the city. But once I talked to the city, they're like, oh, no way, that won't work at all. It's not attached to land. They're really RVs. And even to this day, they still, the state of Oregon and Bend looks at tiny houses on wheels as RVs, basically. So you can't live in them full time. So anyway, so I started to go kind of down that road, and the cottage code was written in 2015, which allowed you to basically take a piece of land, and there's no minimum lot size, and we didn't really have a minimum square footage size for the building. So then we were able to do this, but my original plan of just doing, on say like a double lot, like a 10,000 square foot lot, trying to do say 4 or 5 smaller homes, because in residential single zone land, you could only really get 1.5 houses on this, or 2.5 houses on this piece of property, even though the property would if your footprint is only, say 10 by 20 feet or whatever, it really comfortably could fit a small community, these things. But then, the code didn't support that at the time. And so once the cottage code came along, I was able to do it. And the land that we did it on was 3 acres. So it was a really large, way bigger than I ever would have. I wanted to do 4 houses, maybe at the most. And but I got a lot of support from a bunch of different people to try to do that project. And we ended up doing 22 houses. But what I think is really exciting now is on a stakeholder group with the city of Bend. We have House Bill 2001 has come down, which is saying to cities, hey, you have to, you have to, on residential single land, you have to allow for multifamily. And Bend is kind of going one step further and trying to do some new housing types. And two of those things that I'm excited about that Mary's involved with as well is small house developments, which will allow for 1,500 square foot lots in residential single zone land. So where you would usually have to have a 4,000 square foot lot, you can now subdivide it into a 1,500 square foot lot. That person can own the house, own the land, and it should be much less expensive than the houses that we haven't been right now. Because the big thing that's really killing all the affordable housing is the land cost. That's when you start out, unless you're getting some sort of grants or something like that, you really, it's the cost of land, and it's because people want to live in Bend and what have you. But I think there's a lot of people that are okay with living in these smaller spaces. And so it's really cool to see that the code is now starting to support these types of houses. And, I think the ADUs were a big part of that. The ADU code helped for people to understand kind of like densification and also living in smaller spaces.
Great, thanks, Jesse.
Yeah, sure.
So along those lines, we just had a question come in. Somebody's asking, is it hard to find a lot in Bend? And are deed restrictions a problem? So when you go to build, are there any restrictions with current deeds? Does anybody know? All right, we can follow up with that one and get back to folks. And then, a lot of things that folks are looking for now who are savvy, who are looking for homes, are looking for homes that have a good lot for an ADU, since there are some restrictions on where you can put them on lots and setbacks. Not every lot in Bend you could build one on. And so that would be a good thing to either engage a designer who you might want to work with to build an ADU. They might be able to answer some of those questions. And Earth Advantage actually has a course to get certified as a realtor and being an ADU specialist. And so those folks would be able to help you find a good energy efficient home that also would allow you to build an ADU on the property. Do you all have any other resources like that for folks who might be looking for a lot to build on?
I could speak to that a little bit. The first thing that we do when we look at property is engage an engineer to just look at the land use, the underlying zoning and what's available there. And just before you even think about the house or anything, you're just thinking about the footprint, what utilities are there. And you can do, for not too much money, you could have them create a site map, and then you can do a pre-app with the city. And that's really where you get a lot of your information. And those are free, aside from having the site map generated. And then you can go in and have the city kind of tell you if what you're trying to do is going to work or not. Whoa.
Trying to keep the dog away from the toddler. We got a lot going on here. Webinars during COVID. All right. So Jesse and Mary, I know you're working on a couple projects together. Can you tell us a little bit about these infill projects and how you got started with them and where you're hoping to go?
Sure. Yeah, maybe I'll jump on that, then let Jesse talk a little bit about that. Yeah, we're working on a couple projects together that we're excited about, and he touched on it a little bit earlier. So one of them, we were able to secure some land. It's above the old mill, and it's a little over half an acre, and it had a existing house, older house on it, and a shed. And we've removed that, and we have a plan to do a 7-lot, what they call subdivision, 7-lot, 7 parcels. And 5 of those parcels will have a house and an ADU, and the other 2 will have a single family house. So yeah, it's great because it's the typical underutilized lot in Bend, and removing 1 house and adding back, 12 housing units essentially. So that's exciting. And Jesse is using his house plan. So the Hiatus home that he mentioned earlier is going to be used for the ADU. And another house that he's building now called the Roanoke is going to be used for the single family home. So yeah. Jesse, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sorry, I was slow to the unmute. I was trying to unmute myself. Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing that is a little bit different than the traditional home builder is we really only have right now 2 different models. And when we build them with the same fixtures and the same finishes. And that helps us to be, one, it's helpful for cost. It's also helpful for, you know, with the city, we can have a plan and that can become a master plan. So every time we build the house, we're not having to have it reviewed again. But so that's what we're doing. That's a little different. So we have the 2-bedroom model and then the studio model. And I think they're going to work really well. And I think one of the nice things about that is, you know, it's kind of like right-sized housing. So, you know, if the 2-bedroom, 2-bath is working for you because it's, you know, you and a kid, or you have 3 or 4 people living in there or whatever, that might work for a while. But when the kids leave, and at that time, you know, you're renting your ADU out, so yeah, you're able to subsidize your mortgage a little bit. And then, you know, kids leave and then you move into the ADU. It just gives a lot of options. And, you know, we've traditionally built 3-bedroom, 2-baths forever. And we've kind of designed our cities around the idea that everybody was going to get married and have 2 kids. And that's just not the case anymore. You know, over half the people that are looking for new houses are single or a couple. I think this type of housing is just really important just for the demand of, you know, who's buying houses at this point. So yeah, I think this project is going to be really fun to do. And I think it's just going to add, you know, 12 more units that weren't there before. And hopefully at some point, housing costs will come down because we've also added a lot of inventory to the city. Back to you, Mary.
Do you want to touch on your micro?
Yeah, oh yeah, sure.
That you're working on too, either of you?
I'll start out with that one because that was really exciting to me, because when we did the Hiatus, you know, I thought that you know, we started selling those at $230,000, and one just resold for $320 or some crazy amount. So, you know, the market just kind of took those things, and while they were still the most inexpensive new house on the market, they still were pretty expensive. And you know, this new code that's coming along, it's got through planning, has gone to the city council, or has gone to the city council work group, is this idea of micro apartments. So those are basically, I mean, the easiest way to describe it is a dorm. You have a unit, and every 10 units you have to have a shared kitchen and a shared bathroom. A lot of neighborhood groups came out during planning and during the city council, and, you know, really had a lot to say about it. You know, that these were going to be, you know, really bad for the community, and there was a ton of stuff that sounded a lot like what was happening when we did the cottages as well. And I think if people are willing to live in that way, we should allow them to do that. I mean, this would be 36 units on, you know, 0.6 acres. You know, you look at the land cost there and you divide it by 36, it just like, it to me is just like one of the only things, if you're trying to do affordable by design housing and not get grants, this to me could be a pretty good option, I think.
Great, thank you. Okay, we just had somebody comment in that they might have a connection, Jesse, if you're interested, of 2 women who own a lot that used to have RVs on it that was zoned for RVs. I'll see if I can connect you all after. Okay, we had another question come in just talking about an overview of the ADU process that an individual homeowner needs to know. So who wants to take this one away?
I could probably help with that one.
Great, thanks, Rob.
Okay, so kind of generically speaking, the first thing to do, and that you can do yourself without retaining somebody like me, is to do your own due diligence. So call the city of Bend, ask to speak to the planning department. Usually they'll call you back within about 24 to 48 hours, and you can give them your address and ask them about just basically the feasibility of putting an ADU in your yard. And, you know, are there any easements that you might not be aware of, solar setback standards, anything that might inhibit what you were thinking about. And once you've kind of got the rough and generic, you know, thumbs up blessing from the city, you know, somebody like myself can then help you begin the design process. So at that point, you know, you have to take a look at what your goals are. Are you planning on modifying your home, Do you want to add on? Do you want to go over your garage? Or do you want something detached? Everybody has their own interests. If you're looking at it for, say, short-term rental income, you might want an oversized laundry mudroom, because if people are only going to stay there a week and they have snowboards and they want to not leave them on their vehicle and they want to lock them up, you don't want them carrying them upstairs. So everybody has their own consideration. In that process, you're going to have some sort of a preliminary design developed, and there's going to be some back and forth, some changes. When you're happy with that design, the first official step with the city is called Minimum Development Standards Review. And in that, you basically present to the city a site plan that has all the information that they want on it, all 4 elevation drawings and floor plans, and the city reviews it to make sure that it meets their standards. How far are you casting a shadow over your north property line, lot coverage, a bunch of different restrictions and a bunch of different rules. When you pass that, when you're approved for MDS, then you go on into a standard building permit, and that may involve some engineering or not. That whole process, depending on how things go, could take as little as 6 months or as much as 9 months, depending on if you have some issues with your property that need to be resolved. I just got building permits yesterday for an ADU downtown near Drake Park, and they were accessing the property through a 100-year-old alley that didn't have any legal status. It's just legally, for all intents and purposes, people were just driving through each other's backyards for the last 90 years, and everybody was okay with that. Well, how do you address that with the city in terms of, can you park there or not? So everybody's situation is unique, everything's custom, but that is generically the process that you go through. Once you have building permits, you're off and constructing.
Jamie, Josh, or Ryan, do you want to add anything along to that process from your experience? I know, Ryan, you had mentioned that, there's always challenges, and that you had to do some work around your sewer. Is that correct? Your sewer and utility hookups?
Yeah, that we kind of dodged a bullet there. Utilities were a challenge. I'm sure everybody here on the panel knows, but you basically have to share water and sewer hookups with your main house. And it doesn't matter whether your house is on a slope and the sewer connection is downhill, because it doesn't run up. So we were going to potentially have to use a sewer ejector pump to get it uphill so that it could tie in before it went to the street. Which was really frustrating and could have been really expensive, and just a nasty added complication, fail point, which I'm sure on Christmas Eve is when it's going to fail. What we found out was that what do they call them? The as-built plans, the city, and nobody knows where a lot of this stuff is. I mean, our sewer was so far away from where it was supposed to be on paper. And I'm really glad it was kind of a last-ditch effort. We ended up sending a camera down the sewer clean out from our house, and realized this thing took a 90-degree turn and went 40 feet, 30 feet before, where nobody thought that. It wasn't where it was supposed to be on paper, and it worked to our advantage. It went right towards the ADU. And thankfully, we were able to tie into it there. Otherwise, we're going to have to pump uphill. Water was a similar, not as difficult of a challenge, because of course it's under pressure. You can move it, uphill, downhill. The city worked with us, let us run the water to the ADU through the crawl space of our main house. And that was, that took a little bit of some common sense judgment call on the city's part. And I think I wouldn't say they did us a favor, but they were reasonable there. They were reasonable almost all the time, I would say. I really enjoyed working with the city for the most part. So yeah, utilities were a challenge. And that, I would say, as Rob was saying, part of your feasibility, I think really what you want to do is confirm exactly where your utilities are and like how deep they are. I mean, knowing that your sewer line is 48 inches deep here, that can be a huge game changer versus if it's 8 feet deep or 2 feet deep. So that does cost a little bit, but but not a lot. Definitely worth it. And a lot of the, you know, the sewer company or the folks that found ours and sent the camera down, we ended up using them for our plumbing, and it was you know, it was a good start to a relationship. But yeah, I think it was actually pretty straightforward. As somebody who'd never done this before, the city was really, they'd hold my hand, send me the right form, got back to me quickly. The sort of bureaucratic side of things wasn't too bad in general.
Does anybody else want to have something they want to add on there?
I would say that as a designer, it's typically really comfortable working with the planning and building departments in Bend. They're helpful, they're prompt, they're professional. So almost all of my experiences for years now have been really good with the city.
Good, thanks, Rob.
I can chime in a little bit. One of the challenges we had, there was this dotted line across a stats map from the 70s that cut our property in two. And at the time, the city was working out kind of how to manage that. It indicated an old property line, not a new one. So that was probably about a month delay in getting our permits while that was sorted out. And I would say there was some folks at the city that were really helpful, and maybe it was in part because I was so inexperienced. I did a lot of the permitting aspect and did not feel like I was super well received. When I would go into the office, it was like, oh no, this girl again. But we muddled through it and got all the information and, you know, got our plan. We had originally planned to do a detached unit, but upon learning the codes with roof heights and all that, ended up attaching it to do the second story ADU. It was an evolution that just required some flexibility.
Yeah, we got pretty lucky as far as a lot of the utilities with our project. The water and the sewer lines that were existing ended up being pretty easy to tie into. And then there was the other challenges like Jamie was just mentioning. There was also 3 separate gas lines running through the middle of where we wanted to build our property that weren't supposed to be there. They, you know, when they did the locate, they weren't there, and then we found them while excavating, and they ended up being live gas lines. That was a challenge.
To neighbor's property. It was kind of scary.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the pieces that's really valuable about things like this is that there's a lot of people here who at one point did this for the first time. And so it's great to be able to share those experiences with other folks and just start to normalize this, to not have it be a crazy idea to embark on building an ADU and marching into City Hall to get your permits. But, you know, it's something that we can all kind of tackle, and now there are more and more resources in the community to do it. We have some other questions about any issues arising with neighbors. What did all of your neighbors think when you started on your ADU projects?
I'll chime in here. Our neighbor, we had, you know, talked about it for months and many months, and they understood. It's a high value area, kind of just an underused area, lot. It was much taller than they knew that it was going to be the max, you know, 25 feet tall, 24 feet, 11.5 inches. When it actually went up, that second floor, when that wall tipped up, that was a tough day for them. A tough day for us, for our relationship. And, you know, I think they've kind of gotten used to it. But I think somebody wise, Rob, might have said, we all have to give a little for density. And I might have tried to use that little quip, but it didn't go over real well. You know, at a certain point, it is what it is. You definitely don't want to break any rules, because, you know, a neighbor that doesn't like it finds that out. You know, you could be in some major expensive trouble. So yeah, it was, I think, the longer, if you've had neighbors that have been in place for decades, I would expect some pushback. They're not going to like it. I can't imagine a situation where they really will. I mean, what do they get out of it? They get shade, or, you know, people looking down into their yard, and so that has been a challenge. But you know, we try to be good neighbors in every other respect, and this is sort of one of those things. You know, it could have been a jerk that moved in and did it, and it was a nice guy that went in and did it.
Yeah, Ryan, how do you use the ADU on your property?
Yeah, this is a classic. I since learned. So we live in it now. That was not the original intent. Originally, we were going to build it for a long-term rental, as well as, you know, maybe have a little bigger garage space down below for, like, you know, if I wanted to do home office, shop, that kind of thing. I don't know when, exactly when, but fairly early on, we said, you know what? We got one kid. I lived in Asia in very small spaces for a long time. We can do this. We can rent out our main house. And that's what we're doing. We're trying it anyway. So we live there. Our main house, we've rented that long term, just month to month. And so far, so good. I mean, it's an adjustment going from, you know, 3,200 square feet to 800. But mostly good adjustments. And, you know, we built it knowing we were going to live in it. So we went a lot higher end on a lot of things that really matter to me. I mean, I don't really care about super high end countertops, but it has radiant floor heat, and it has, you know, nice big windows. So we spent our money on things that mattered more to us, which is really nice that we get to benefit from that instead of watching somebody, you know, a renter potentially kind of not take it, kind of take things for granted. Like, a renter doesn't really care how well air sealed and insulated and waterproofed it is. I do. I appreciate that every time I'm in there, and I can't wait for my first winter and watch my little tiny utility bills come in.
I love it. You can tell who has done a lot of work on their home when they say, I can't wait to see my utility bills. That's a really good sign. I like to hear that. And I believe, well, I saw Jamie laughing a little bit in the background. I don't know if you want to share or not. You don't have to. But I'd also like to hear your experience of how you use your ADU as well.
Yeah, so we have a pretty similar story to Ryan as far as neighbors and the evolution of moving into our ADU. We live in it now, and we had several neighbors that were super supportive and inspired one neighbor to pursue ADU plans. And I think that's going to start happening pretty soon, right across the alley from us. And then another neighbor accused us of building a McMansion, which is the 600 square feet that we live in. But it was that, you know, 24-foot, 11-inch wall that went up that sort of sealed that deal. It was an eye-opener for all of us too. I remember staying in the alley, my eyes bugged out. And the same goes for Josh.
Yeah, what'd we do?
But we went from an 800 square foot, 900 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath to 600 square feet ADU, and Josh had suggested maybe we would want to live in it, and I was crying. I was like, I love our house, you know, I can't move out of our house. But once this thing came together, it was, you know, pretty perfect. I love the space, and like Ryan, we have big windows, and it's super efficient, and we've got the garage below us, and it's just really fantastic for our lifestyle, and it's simple. And we built it planning on doing some rental. I've been a travel nurse, so I was always looking for 3-month housing contracts, and those are hard to come by. So we were thinking of doing kind of the middle ground with rentals, but now we have a long-term renter in our main house, and, you know, enjoying the small space. It's great.
Yeah, and it really seems like you've done a great job of building community at your place with that beautiful fire pit, and just a really great sense of community there too.
Yeah, that was important. Yeah. For the travel nurse drifter part of my life, having spaces where it's easy to come together and not a barrier. Yeah. Definitely a motivator.
Well, we have a question with somebody asking about how much a standard ADU would rent for a studio or a 2-bedroom ADU. And just wondering how ADUs help to keep prices affordable if people pay more to buy a house with an ADU. Does anybody, it sounds like none of you are renting out your ADUs right now, but does anybody have perspective they want to share on this?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So before I sold the property, I was renting it long-term, and my ADU was on the west side of Bend. So it was in a pretty prime location, and location has, I think, a lot to do with the rents. And so it was 2-bedroom, 1-bath, about 800 square feet, and I was getting $1,700 a month for it, which probably sounds high to a lot of people. And it is high. I mean, that was market rate, and that's kind of the state of affairs here in Bend, sad to say, because that's really not affordable for most people. So yeah, and I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question, Lindsay, about the...
How do homes that sell for more money with an ADU, how are they keeping prices affordable?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, I think we are seeing more houses with ADUs selling, and it is adding a lot of value to the property. So, they are more expensive. And depending on where that is and the use of the ADU, it might become a rental, and it's tough to say what that would rent for depending on the location, but it is adding more inventory to the housing, which is so needed here. So yeah, it's, I think the more of those that we can see built, they add a lot of value for the homeowners in so many ways, but the community as well.
Mm-hmm. I have a friend who bought a house with an ADU, and it pays almost half or maybe a little more than half of her mortgage. And so when it came to penciling, it was more upfront, but when it came out to penciling the monthly payments, it was a better investment than other properties for her at the time. And that was a big deal for them. And I have some friends who rent, and actually I want to say maybe in like the 700 or 800 range of like renting ADUs in folks' backyards with like 1-bedroom, 1-bath. But a lot of times you see it match up with a lot of what other units, like not necessarily an ADU renting for.
Right. I don't think there's actually there's no difference. I mean, you walk into an ADU, and if you want to know what it's going to rent for, you forget the fact that it's an ADU. It's kind of irrelevant, honestly.
Great. All right. Well, I'm trying to keep up. There's a lot of questions coming in here. I did want to come back to some lessons learned on the design side. Does anybody feel like they have some big lessons learned from the design of their property that if you were to do it again, you'd say, make sure you do this? Or on the flip side, what's your favorite part of your small space? This is kind of a question for everybody, either in design or living in them. Mary, do you want to start? Or Jesse, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say with the small space thing, I mean, I think light is like the most important thing, I think, in a small space. And, windows can be very expensive, but I think it's really, really important to try to get as much light in your small space as you can. And then the other thing that we really always look at is the finishes. You're building such a small space, it might not cost you much more to do vinyl versus a hardwood floor. If you really love that floor, it might only be a few $100s because you only have 300 or 400 square feet of flooring. So I think just remembering that you're going to be in this tight space and putting a lot of light into it and really being conscious of the finishes and the details, I think, is super important.
Yeah, I would just agree with Jesse on that. The natural light is super important in any small space. And Rob did such a great job designing the ADU for me. There was a ton of windows, and it just made the space feel so bright and open, and it felt so much bigger than 800 square feet. And we actually lived in there for the first 4 months because we were doing a remodel on our house, so we got to experience it. So light is key. And I would say the other thing in small spaces is storage. really think about, you know, adding some storage, and Rob probably has some good ideas for that. There's ways to tuck it in, and I actually saw a cool spot in Ryan's house or ADU with some storage under a stairwell. So.
Oh, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I think I know Jamie, both of you, 24 feet, 11 inches, use all the height you can. You know, you can probably see back there in the garage there, I have cabinets that are, you know, they are only accessible by a ladder, and I'm tall. But I would so rather have those than not have them. Same thing in our kitchen. We have a third row of cabinets that are, you know, for the crock pot or whatever, you don't need to get to every day. Storage is key. The other little thing I would think about how your ADU is going to affect your main house. When we built ours, you know, there was the impact on the neighbors. That was a focus. But then, whoa! All of a sudden, we used to have a view out this window of our main house, and that's gone. And that was a little bit, you know, we hadn't really thought that through completely. And also, as far as privacy goes, you know, when you have 6 feet between your buildings, if you have two windows that line up and one of them's, you know, kitchen window, one of them's bathroom window or whatever, you need to think about that. We ended up with a balcony that's lovely, and it added, I mean, it's a wonderful space, but it looks right into the window of the main house, of a bedroom. And as soon as we built that balcony and walked out onto it, I kind of went, oh boy, we need to think of something here, because your eye just went straight into the bed. It was awkward. And we ended up, you know, on the handrail welding in a privacy panel is the best thing I could call it. And I'm really glad we did that. And that was sort of an afterthought, but doing that intentionally would have been, you know, maybe a little cheaper and a little more integrated.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Okay, I think we're going to go over by a minute here, but I just have one other question and see if anybody has experience with this. If you can't afford a custom ADU, are there any prefab options or a good alternative from a reputable company? Does anybody happen to know that after? We can follow up after too.
Yeah, that would be a whole different forum on just prefab. But yeah, there's a lot of companies that are popping up in this space that are doing prefab. And, you know, as Rob was saying earlier in the call, I mean, it can be difficult sometimes because a lot of times these ADUs become custom for the space and for the use of the owners. So the prefab option, you know, it's still an option, but it might not work for a lot of people. But if it does work, there are some companies. There's a company called Dweller, and they're out of Portland. And they're kind of a turnkey option, which I really like their business model because it takes a lot of the work out for the homeowner. So for people that, you know, maybe don't want to make a ton of decisions or don't have time to do that, Dweller is great. And they have a prefab model. I think it's built in Idaho, and they, you know, truck it to the site and place it on the foundation. So that's one. And then there's another company in Salem called Idea Box. And they also have an ADU prefab as well.
All right, thanks, Mary. Okay, and then quickly, does anybody have solar on their ADUs?
I pre-wired for solar, but I didn't install it.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah, so we'll have to stay tuned for a status update for next year. But there are great incentives to build solar ready when you're building your ADU, and you can actually get some incentives for just considering solar in the design process. So making sure that it's oriented correctly and there's roof space and you haven't put vents where your panels would go, and running the conduit ahead of time so you don't have to do an external conduit afterwards. So it makes the installation a lot easier down the road, and just make sure that you're building a building that you can put solar on in the future. Because believe it or not, there are a lot more homes in Bend that can't have solar than can, which is really unfortunate that that opportunity was just wiped clear by bad design of homes. So, all right, well, I'm I was just going to pull up a few photos here as we wrap up. Does anybody have any closing thoughts? All right. All right. Well, thank you to all of our panelists for being here. Now I'm, oh my goodness. There we go. Couldn't find my PowerPoint here. So I meant to show these at the beginning, but turned off the presentation too quickly. So just to give you some food for thought, and you'll be able to see these in the virtual tours on our website. And I'm just about done posting all the links for those on our website. So here's a view of Jamie and Josh's ADU porch. They actually used some reclaimed fencing to build a siding on their ADU. Here's the ADU going up, so you can see the big wall. And a quick shot of Ryan's ADU. And those are all the photos I was able to add in there at the last minute. So just a reminder that you can see all the other panel discussions. They were recorded, and you can find them on our website very soon once we have a minute to catch up and post all of those, but the recordings will be coming soon. And we'll send out a recording of this event afterwards and try to follow up with some of those questions and resources that were mentioned here tonight. You can still visit CORE's site in person on September 26th. They might be almost out of spots, but if you're interested, you can respond to some of the information that I send out, and we'll see if we can set up a time for folks to visit their site in person. They're building a cottage community of affordable zero energy homes. And thank you again to you all for being here tonight. We hope to connect and engage in more conversations in the future. I really appreciate that you all are willing to share your experiences with all of us so that we can start to build more ADUs and other housing options here in Bend and across Central Oregon. All right, thank you everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.